You're live.
Hello, I'm Bob Mover, and I'd like to welcome you to uh, my podcast, On the Real Side. Um, Tonight's guest is, I don't know how to describe him, but let's just say it's me. I'm my own guest tonight, and it's a pleasure to be with you. And I'm going to talk about a few aspects of the life and talk about a couple of people I've known and start from there. Actually, where I'd like to begin is, first of all, I'd like to thank all the people, especially you who are watching it right now, for being part of our channel and watching this presentation. And, I thank you all. I've also noticed, my producer, Jesse Kaiser, and I have noticed that a large percentage of those who have watched this show have not subscribed to our YouTube channel yet, Bob at Bob Mover Jazzability. In fact, exactly, she said, we have ways of charting the number of people who have subscribed. Um, Jesse said 37.5% of those who watched have not subscribed. And just so you know the statistics, and as Steve Wright pointed out, a wonderful comedian who used to be my neighbor, he said that 62.7% of people surveyed say that statistics are meaningless. So, but the statistics we have means that we could use a few more subscribers. In fact, many more. So I'll ask you all for a quick favor, and please subscribe to our channel. It's free, and it helps us more than you know. I won't go into detail, but it does. And tell others, tell your friends to visit our channel, which is at Bob Mover Jazzability, and ask them to subscribe. So thank you. On that note, there were a couple of things on my mind. I was thinking about a friend of mine and I were having a discussion earlier, and someone said I made the mistake of not reading a contract all the way through. So no matter what profession you're in, whether you're a musician or not, I can now confidently give you all the advice to whatever you're reading, whatever you got to sign, read it well before you sign it. I won't go into the story of that, but the person who said, "Well, you should have read it. You should have, you got to be professional about that." And I was thinking, well, yes, it is a profession. That's true. And then I thought about it. Well, it's a vocation as well, and maybe that's a cop out. But I was thinking about musicians I've known, and the better ones and the smarter ones for sure treated it as a profession as well. Then there's another kind of musician for whom they have to make a living, so it's a profession in the sense that they are doing that. But it's a broader feeling of it being a vocation, the ability to play and to make music almost without thinking about fame and recognition and those kind of things. There have been a few cats like that, quite a few actually. And, it wasn't so important to win the downbeat poll or to make a lot of records or this kind of thing, especially in the days before media was as prevalent as it is now. And I was thinking of a few people like that and wanted to tell you a couple stories about these people. One guy that comes to mind is a tenor player named Joe Karcher, Kaercher, Joe Karcher. And Joe is no longer with us. He died about probably 20 years ago now, close to that. And Joe was about 10, 12 years older than I. And I met Joe around 1968, 69. I was in Boston, and I was walking down the street. Might have been Hemingway Street, one of those streets very close to Berkeley. And I saw this tall, very thin guy sitting on a doorstep listening to a reel-to-reel portable tape. They used to have those before cassettes. There were, Sanyo made one, and a few companies made them. And they were reel-to-reel, and you could plug them in and record. You could also, there was batteries. You could just take it out and the battery would last for a while. And so there weren't that many. I never saw a lot of them, but some people had one. So anyway, I'm walking down Boylston Street with my horn, which was always with me. And I see this scarecrow-looking guy sitting on his doorstep, I assume, listening to this music. And I immediately recognized the alto player on it as Charlie Mariano. So I stopped, and Charlie was teaching in Boston in those days, though he was not there at this point. He was on the road somewhere. So I stopped and listened, and I quietly said to him, I said, "Oh, Charlie Mariano." He said, "Yep." And Joe was a man of few words. You could get him, sometimes you could get him to talk, but he didn't often talk a lot. But he was one syllable guy. "Yep." I said, "Boy, he sounds good." I said, who's the tenor player? Tenor player sounds good too. He says, "Oh, me." I said, "Oh, you, wow, you sound really good. Who's the rhythm section?" He said, "Well, Hank Jones, Mundell Lowe, whoever, well, Charlie Persip, and I forget who, a bass player of note as well." I said, "Wow, that's a hell of a rhythm section. I probably should know you." He said, "No, you shouldn't. You won't." I said, "Really? Well, who are you?" He said, "I'm Joe, Joe Karcher." I said, "Well, man, you sure sound beautiful. But how is that? Where'd you get that? I mean, how'd you play with that rhythm section?" He said, "Oh, Music Minus One, man, MMO." I said, "That's before Aebersold, what they call Aebersold record now, or play-alongs. These were the original play-alongs." So it was a pre-recorded rhythm section of these all-star cats. And, that was that. So I said, "Really? Well, he says, you want to come in and play some with me?" He saw my horn. I said, I'd love to, and I saw an opportunity. I said, this guy really can play, and I could probably learn something from him. So I was all out to learn from everybody I could. What a great opportunity this was. So, as we came inside and we played, and I got to know Joe that day. And I said, "Well, what do you do? What do you, He said, "Well, I graduated Berkeley, I did that." He said, "And sometimes I play like weddings and stuff, I do some of that, but I don't do a lot of that." He said, "I don't really like to do that. I like to play jazz, and, I don't really like to play commercial gigs." He said, "But I work in a bank." He said, "And basically my routine is every day I go to work in this bank, and I come home, eat a little dinner, and play along with these records for a couple of hours until it probably won't bug the neighbors anymore." And that's what I do. So, I'm here almost every day. If you're around, just feel free to come in. And, we had a little glass of wine and, had a nice time and became friends for years. And Joe was a beautiful player. The only recording of him that I know of, I suppose he's got recordings. Years later, he married a very nice woman who was a journalist. And they lived in Connecticut. And they had a son that he named Charles Christopher Karcher. Charles Christopher, being Charlie Parker's name, was Charles Christopher Parker. So Joe's son was Charles Christopher Karcher. And there's a couple other memories I have of Joe. I played at a place called the Rise Club. The rhythm section was James Williams on piano and Boots Mailson on bass and Akita Tana on drums. And a trumpet player named Jeff Stout was playing trumpet with me. And I'd come up from New York to play this gig years later. And Joe came and sat in with us. And recently, a friend of mine, Peter Groff, who was an old friend, former roommate, said, I've got a tape of that gig. So he sent it to me, and that's the only Joe Karcher that that I've found. Of course, somewhere, if Mary, his wife, who I've lost touch with, somehow listens to this show, it would be wonderful if she has any of the tapes of Joe to get in touch with me, and maybe we can find a way, for the world to hear it. I don't think they'll become millionaires from it, but Joe was worth hearing. His style was sort of like somewhere in between Dexter Gordon and Warren Marsh. He had a real intelligent approach to music, and he had a very kind of romantic quality in his playing too. He didn't sound like anybody. In fact, a few years later, my good buddy Sal Nistico was playing a little club in Boston, and Sal and I had this kind of agreement with each other to, his bandstand was my bandstand was his bandstand. So we didn't even have to ask each other, we would just play. So Sal happened to have an especially problematic rhythm section. The club had hired an organ player who really didn't understand the way Sal played. And so Sal said, please come by. I came by the first night and played, and he said, can you come back tomorrow? He said, because you can help rescue me. You really saved me tonight, man. Come by tomorrow. And I said, sure, I'll come by. And that was a perfect excuse. I said, let me bring Joe. So I brought Joe in. And the beautiful thing about these cats, is there was no competition at all. It was like when I saw George Coleman's octet, which brought back a lot of memories to me. When we did the interview with Joe, I was inspired to listen to more of Joe with George. There was some stuff there, and the way that George and Sal Nistico interact. They're competitive in the sense that they want you to play your best and they want to bring the best out of each other, but they don't want to make the other guy feel foolish. That would defeat the purpose of, and so it was the same thing when Joe sat in with Sal. Like Sal, really, they were listening to each other and really exchanging ideas. It was a beautiful experience. And Sal even thanked me. He said, man, thanks for coming by and thanks for bringing your buddy, man. That was what a revelation to hear Joe. So many years later, I didn't see Joe. I moved back. Well, I was in New York. I lived in Canada for a period of time. And I would say a good 15 years or so passed since the time I sat in that Joe and I sat in with Sal together, and also the experience at the Rise Club, which was before that. But some years later, I got a call in New York from Joe's wife, Mary. And she said, oh, Joe's been trying to reach you. Let me get Joe. And, Joe said, any chance I could come to New York and hang? I said, of course. I don't really have room to put you in. He said, I want to come with my wife and my son. I said, well, maybe I can find you a place with friends of mine, at least for a night or two. He said, no, we can cover a motel for a night or two. Don't worry about it, but I want to see you and I want to play together. I said, well, I've got something at Smalls coming up, and why don't you come and sit in with me there? So, play the night. So Joe came down and he played, and then there was an after-hours session, and we stayed for that, and we played till the sun came up together. And in the course of the night, Joe's wife, and Joe was barely 50 at this point, maybe a little over 50. Mary called me aside and said, Joe is very sick. You wouldn't know it, but he's been diagnosed, and he may not have that much time left. So I can't tell you how much this night has meant for Joe. And then I never did see Joe again. But you know, jazz history books are not going to know about Joe Karcher, and you know, you won't. He never won any polls. He never even made records, but he meant something to jazz. He was a spirit of jazz. You know, these people are almost like kind of like jazz angels. You know, he didn't care about, you know, winning polls. Maybe he might have had an inferiority complex. I don't know. You know, I'm not an analyst, so I don't know. But you know, for whatever reason, he sure played beautifully, and he's another one that you won't. You know, we won't really have. He doesn't really have a place in the so-called history of this music. You know, there were quite a lot of iconoclasts like that that came up in that period. Some people basically stayed in one city; they didn't want to travel. I mean, Ira Sullivan. I've never heard anybody play anything better than Ira Sullivan. And first, Ira was in Chicago, pretty exclusively there. And then in the early 60s, he came down to Miami, mainly because his wife, Charlene, needed to be there for medical purposes. And Ira settled in Florida. And for a period, Red Rodney, his old friend, who had put Ira on a couple of records as well, called and got Ira to co-lead a group with him. And they traveled. So Ira had about 2 or 3 years with Red. Might have even been 4 or 5 years. I'm not keeping track. But he made several records with Red and actually started, I think he made the downbeat pole on a couple of his instruments. Ira played trumpet. He said that was his first instrument. I mean, his favorite. Felt he played that best, but nobody else really could say what he played best because he played amazing on all of them. He played, you know, alto and tenor and soprano, a lot of nice soprano later. And in his late 30s, early 40s, he took up flute and really played it very serious. He played beautiful flute. So, you know, but Ira never really traveled. I mean, people would sit in with him. Anybody that came to Florida would sit in with Ira. And he came to Chicago every year, just about, because Joe Siegel, who was running the jazz scene in Chicago, brought Ira for the Charlie Parker Festival and for various things. But, you know, Ira was one that was not in the competitive ring, but definitely was somebody who I think everybody should know. And fortunately, he did record prolifically. So if you don't know Ira Sullivan, you should really listen to him. I met Ira when I was 13 years old, and my life was totally changed upon meeting Ira. It was I met Ira during Christmas time, Christmas season, and there was a DJ in Miami named Alan Rock, and he had a show, radio show that started, I believe he started at midnight, and the bass would be playing, you see the walking bass, and he had the coolest voice. He was like, "Good evening, jazz fans. My name is Alan Rock, and I'm here to bring you Jazz on the Rocks." And Alan would play great music, and I was 13 and had been playing the saxophone for a couple of weeks at that time. And he had a contest where if you named like a blindfold test, but they call it downbeat, he wouldn't tell you who it was. And if you could name the artist correctly, you'd win a free record. So I won a few free records. And Alan, he had no idea. I think he thought I was a woman because I had this high voice and my name was Bobby. So, you know, I mean, he was certainly dressed nicely the night I came down to the studio. We made an appointment that I would come down. He said, "You should come down and pick up your records." So, you know, I just, maybe Alan always looked that good. But anyway, I came to the studio and he was kind of, surprised that I was a 13-year-old boy, and I'd identified people like Dexter Gordon and Elmo Hope and things like that, which most people didn't know. Dexter was not yet very popular in America. This is 1965. My light has fallen down here. Let me see. Whoops. Let me see. Yeah, this is in my hand. The light is being held in my hand. Maybe I can just call my wife for a second and have this put back up. Well, this is, actually I did it. Is that all right? Well, it looks a little shadowy, but that's good. That nice hip shadow in the background and my lip gloss. Anyway, I was, I'd asked people where was jazz, and a couple people I'd asked said, "Oh, you got to meet Ira Sullivan because he's the cat down here, So Alan Rock, who is still alive and still around, and in Orlando, Florida, for many years after that, Alan was actually Bozo the Clown, and on television, that was his gig that he got. But he was a huge influence on jazz, Alan too, in Miami. So Alan would invite me to the show, and he'd even let me do the show with him, and we'd sit there, and even though I had school, I didn't live at home. We were living in a kind of home for children at the time, which I won't go into that. But the good thing about living in a place like that was nobody cared where you went. So, I'd slip out around 11 o'clock and nobody seemed to miss me. I'd go to the show and hang with Alan till the wee hours of the morning and do the show. And it was a lovely time. And Alan told me, he said, by the way, this Sunday, and it was right after Christmas, I think, there's a concert at the Coconut Grove Coffee House. I think it was called something like that, a Sunday afternoon. And he said, and I'm producing the concert, and it's Ira's Quartet. And because there's food in this place, you can come in. It's not just a bar. So he said, why don't you come to this concert? So, I'd only been playing the saxophone for a few months. And so I was not, ready to play or anything, but sure, I had never really gotten to hear a lot of jazz live. And I went down to the Coconut Grove Coffee House and heard Ira for the first time. And, he started out on tenor. I still remember what he played. Isn't that funny? That was, I was 13 years old and I'm 71 now. Was that 23, 33, 43, 53, 63, 58 years ago. And, I can't remember the whole evening, but I do remember the first set, a large part of what he played. He opened with Star Eyes on tenor. And then he played a tune called Sweet Georgia Bright by Charles Lloyd. Not Sweet Georgia Brown, but Sweet Georgia Bright. Remember that? And then he played Walking in a Winter Wonderland with the Harmon Mute in a very kind of a two-beat, kind of like in the style that Miles Davis was playing, Bye Bye Blackbird and All of You and those things. Just kind of whispering like, da-da-da, 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 with the bass playing in two. It was so beautiful. And then, the afternoon progressed like that, and I was just astounded. I'd heard Stan Getz. I had actually heard Stan before that and gotten to know Stan a little bit. But other than that, I'd never heard somebody play the horns, play saxophone, and I would play trumpet too, of course, like that for, with the exception of Stan, to hear that. Um, so I was knocked out, and then I said hello, and I think Alan Rock introduced me to Ira, and the first thing Ira said to me, he looked at me, I told him how much I was enjoying his playing, and then he said, "So, you ever eat Mexican food?" And I said, "Actually, no, I never have." You didn't have a lot of Mexican restaurants in those days, even in Miami. You had some Cuban restaurants because the Cubans were just starting to come into the States and to Miami, but it wasn't something. And then we we went out to dinner and we talked, and Ira told me about what it was like to work with Charlie Parker. I asked him, I remember one thing he told me about playing with Charlie Parker, because there was a picture in Downbeat of Ira with Charlie Parker that had come out in a special Charlie Parker issue of Downbeat. And it showed Ira, I guess he was like 22 or something, with these horn-rimmed glasses on, looking very hip, and standing there with Bird. And he said one thing he remembered about Bird that struck him as particularly interesting was how he could change his vernacular with whom he was talking, with whom he was speaking with. So, if he was talking to a guy that spoke street, it was like, "Yeah, Bird's a fantastic baby, blah, 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 this and that." Then he was like, "Yeah, baby, I'm hip. Are you," as Steve Allen used to say, "I'm dig, you hip." No, anyway, I'm, he was like that. Whereas if someone said, "Mr. Parker, I'm such and such, and thereby and thusly such and such," then Bird was very effusive and erudite with him. Yes, thusly and therefore, and Bird, Ira said that was a very impressive thing to him, and Ira could do that himself. He would. It's almost like the movie Zelig with the Woody Allen movie. The thing is that he really has the ability to become whoever he's talking with. So people actually get the feeling that they're talking to themselves. And, that's sort of an interesting approach. So, and years later when I met Sonny Rollins, I noticed that Sonny had the same, that same quality, that approach to conversation with people, that flexibility, So anyway, we went out to, and I told Ira I was starting to play saxophone, and much like I did with Kenny Dorham later when I found out, I told that story about when KD had a taxi and I thought that was his personal car. Ira said, "Come on, we'll go in my car to the Mexican restaurant." He had like a car, I guess the year was 1965, and he had like this 1958 Dodge or 50, and when he said, "Here's my car," I almost laughed because, I did kind of laugh. I said, "That's pretty funny." He said, "What do you mean funny?" Well, because the guy I'd met before was Stan Getz, and Stan had quite a bit of money. He had just had the girl from Ipanema and all that, and I felt like a star like Ira, was certainly as wealthy as Stan, or somewhere around that. And he started laughing. He said, "No, it's my car." I said, "No, this can't be your car." He said, "Man, I got me from Chicago to here. Don't put it down. It's my car." I said, "Oh, it really is your car." So we did that. And he told me that up until that time, he had left Chicago, gone to Florida, and had been working at Burger King. And I was like, "No, really?" Oh, and Ira was had an attitude, he was so optimistic, such an optimist and an upbeat kind of cat, Ira says, "Oh yeah, man." He said, "It wasn't so bad. They let me wear that hat, the king hat." He said it was great. I got to do that. He said, then of course, now I think I've got a little bit of work going, and so I think I can. I've taken it upon myself. I quit Burger King, but I'm still doing landscaping. And Ira did landscaping on and off for the rest of his life. It kept him off the road. He really didn't like being on the road. He was very devoted to his family, very much loved his wife and his daughter Leslie, who's called Sonny now. Well, and his boys, Brevard and Brogan. Brogan and Brevard had not yet been born, but he was down there, and so Ira offered to. He said, "What kind of horn you got?" And he called my mother, because I was going to be living with my mother. We moved back to my mother. We were in this children's school. It was called the Drexel School, but it was more like I said, like a home for kids whose parents couldn't take them. And so Ira said, "Well, why don't you, bring me your horn?" So I showed him the horn I had, and it was a $35 Holton saxophone, which, as Getz called it, silver turning green. It had a lot of corrode on it, and Ira tried it. I mean, he just looked at it and he said, well, and he blew a few notes on my alto. He said, maybe I got, oh, something fell down over there. I think there's a microphone. No, look behind you. Is that a mic?
No.
Oh, Mr. Razor. All right. Anyway, he looked at my horn and he said, I've got a repairman, and I think he can fix this up for you. He said, it needs some work, so let me take care of it. I said, I don't have any money to help you. We're really people. He said, no. He said, I don't either. He said, but I've got good credit with this guy. He said, let me do it for you. I'll fix it for you. So Ira was going to fix my horn, and he did. He gave it to me. We met the next week, and he got my horn fixed. And then it's a very long story with Ira, but we became very good friends, and I, kept close to Ira. I guess he's gone about 2 years now, and there are too many. I'm saving a lot of those stories for the book, for my memoirs. But what I mean to say is that Ira was one of those people that, as Joe Farrell, and was a big influence. Ira was a huge influence on Joe Farrell in Chicago, and many cats really fell under the sway of Ira. And Joe told me once that Ira was one of the only musicians that he actually dreamt about. And I guess I do too. So if you don't know Ira, I'm going to not continue so long with this story, because it's a too long a story to tell here. And let's just call this chapter 1 of Ira. So, that's another great musician that was not acknowledged the way he should have been, But Ira was a devout Christian, and, he chose life over the road. He'd had his demons, and he'd wrestled with his demons, and he conquered his demons, and he was a very inspirational person, And one other person I was thinking of talking to you about, who didn't get a lot of recognition, and was hardly and was he wasn't really acknowledged very much, but was one of the more brilliant people that I've known, is a guy named Bill Rubenstein. And Bill was interesting. He bore an uncanny resemblance to Bill Evans. And I believe that they were about the same age. I mean, they were about the same age. Somebody said that they died sort of within a year or so of each other, and they were born within a year or so of each other. And Bill had that kind of lyricism that that Bill Evans had, and both were Bill. And Bill was. There used to be these sessions at a place called the Cafe London and Woody's, these two clubs near 23rd Street in Manhattan in the late 60s and early 70s. And a lot of cats would play there. And Bill was one of the piano players that could be found jamming there. Bob Dorough used to be there sometimes, John Bunch, and quite a few players would play at these sessions. And Bill kind of took a liking to me, and it turned out we both lived in the Village. This was in the early 70s when I really got to know Bill. And he was playing solo piano at the Village Gate. He did that a lot. And he also tuned the pianos at the Gate and several of the other clubs in town. Bill was a fantastic piano tuner. He had perfect pitch, and the pianos, when he tuned it stayed in tune. He was a perfectionist type of guy. So he was excellent. That besides being a great player who knew so many songs, he knew all these beautiful songs. And I always made it a point to get next to piano players. That was something that I, really concentrated on, getting to know pianists. In Florida, I had known Tony Castellano and his brother Dolph, the Castellano twins. I was known as the third Castellano twin. I was bugging those guys so much. And there were a lot of piano players. Miami was a real piano player town. Vince Maggio, who was later head of the university piano department, a guy named Tony Prentice, Jimmy Crawford. There were a bunch of cats in Miami. So when I came to New York, I always found piano players to hang out with. And Bill was somebody who I really wanted to know. And he liked me too, so this was good. And Bill had a drug habit. And when I met him, he was on the methadone program. So I didn't really see that side of him, what we call the dirty parts and stuff like that of people that are drug addicts. He was trying to be as straight as he could. And he would take me to the methadone Christmas parties, which talk about some good music. Boy, were there great musicians up there. I remember the methadone Christmas party. I made it 2 years in a row. It was one of my favorite jam sessions, I'd ever been to. You couldn't, a lot of great players. Anyway, Bill was an intellectual as well. Like you could talk to him. He knew about Wilhelm Reich. He knew about Dostoevsky. He was a very well-versed, intelligent guy. And he was a large person. And, Bill Evans was actually bigger than you would think when you saw him. He was taller than you thought. And he was kind of, and Bill had a ponytail and rode a motorcycle. And there was a period where Bill, I was playing with a commercial band. And this guy named Ray, whose last name I don't remember, but he had been a big band singer. And he had gotten out of music and only did music on the weekends. He had his own television repair store or something like that, But he sang. He was a singer, and he would front the band and sing. And so I would get good piano players. I got Don Friedman on that gig one time, and I'll never forget, he came to the gig with a Farfisa. And I don't know, Farfisa was one of the first kind of electric pianos, but it sounded between a piano and an organ. And we used to joke, it really sounded like its name, Farfisa. It sounded like that. And, but it sounded good when Don played it, So, But anyway, I brought him and Don Friedman, and then I got Bill onto the gig. And Bill was an astoundingly good musician. He could play anything in any key. He had perfect pitch. And so one of the gigs I got Bill on, he comes there. He always showed up early because Bill had to make sure, because of his perfect pitch, if the piano was out of tune, it annoyed the hell out of him. He couldn't take it. It would actually, he said it physically hurt him if the piano were too much out of tune. He just would cringe, couldn't stand it. So he'd come with his piano tuning tools to the gig, and he'd show up about 45 minutes to an hour early so he could make sure the piano was going to be okay. So now, Bill, we're playing a Jewish community center, and it's a dance for grown-ups. It's an adult dance. And the year is 1972, 73. And Bill shows up, and the piano is so out of tune that, and this is before everybody started playing electric instruments. Ray, the leader, had asked them, do you have a piano there? And they said, yes, we have a piano here. So nobody had to bring electric. So Bill plays the piano, and he sits there, oh my God. He says, this piano is terrible. He said, it's a half a tone flat, meaning that I'm doing a podcast at the moment. I'll call you back. That's all right. Good enough. Yeah. I should have put it on, what do you call it? Airport mode, airplane mode. I'm learning. Anyway, it gives you a little homey feeling of atmosphere. Were we sitting in my living room, which we are, I am. This is what it would be like. So we get there, and the piano is so out of tune that it's a half step flat, meaning that if you play a B flat, it comes out sounding A. Is that right? I think so. Well, what it was, yeah, if you played an A, you'd be in B flat concert, but you'd have to play an A on the piano. That's so, you had to do that. So I told Bill we could take turns because I like doing that too. But Bill said, no, that's not going to work because the bass player is not going to be able to transpose all these things. So what you do is you play in the regular key and the bass player will play in the other key, in the regular key, and it'll be out of tune and I'll transpose. So I'll be in the funny keys. Bill said he would. And he played the whole night, just not even a mistake, any tune, any key, any tempo he's playing in 4 sharps while we're in the key of F. He's like, he was wonderful. Anyway, he's there and he's grimacing too because the piano still isn't in tune. So he's playing, he's like got these pained expressions on his face, and he's got his dark glasses on, and he's his tinted glasses that he wore with his ponytail, and he was a cool dude, that's what you would call him. He was just, nothing perturbed him. He was always calm and, but intense. Anyway, the end of the night, it's finally, the gig is over. We get paid. And Bill's there. He's got his motorcycle helmet in his hand. His leather jacket is on. And it's time to go. And, I'm going to go catch the subway. And Bill's going to ride back to town. The gig was in Queens. And his motorcycle. And Bill says, he starts to walk out the door. He says, you know what? Just give me a minute here. 1 minute, one moment. And he takes his tools out because he had his toolbox with him. And he proceeds to untune the piano. He turns the pegs all the way over to where the strings are popping out of the keyboard. He's just totally destroying the piano. And he says, okay, now we can go. Nobody's ever going to play this jive motherfucker again, ever. He says, it's dead. I killed it. like he was an insect. I killed it. I got rid of it. And then, anyway, Bill and I became good friends. His wife, Vicky, they got divorced. And Vicky became like the mother I never had. She was just a wonderful person, too. I was sorry they couldn't really get it together. But she would come to all my gigs and cook me Christmas dinner. She made the best Cornish hens stuffing with this personal stuffing she made, and you know, she loved to drink wine and hang out, and she was a real good buddy of mine. CH20309, that was her phone number when everything was 212. And she lived down the street, not too far away. But Bill left the village, and he got a gig up at one of the lounges, at Kutcher's Lounge, which was in upstate New York in the Catskills. It was a Jewish resort, and he didn't get it because he was Jewish, or nor did he have any religious affiliations. But it was a place where you could live and play the show, and also, rumor had it, there was a very good drug connection up there, and it was peaceful and nobody would bug you. And George Handy, who was a great musician too, was also up there at one of the resorts. And you know, you'd find these sympathetic people up there. A couple of things. Bill had a fire. That's right. He got a new apartment. Another apartment had a fire, and after that, he was upstate, and so I didn't see Bill for a couple of years, and there was a girl that I knew, and she and I were, like, I guess you would say, friends with benefits. We were, you know, close friends, and she loved music. And you know, I met her when I was playing with Jackie Byard, and she would come in, like, and really she knew the tunes, and she knew a lot about music. And she's a social worker and worked in the Greenwich Village nursing home, which was an incredible nursing home because you had all these showbiz people from the, you know, the 30s and 40s who were now in retirement and past retirement age. And I played every month. I would play at least once and sometimes twice a month. I'd bring in a few musicians and we'd play the old tunes for those people. And I even got a plaque from the nursing home, the village nursing home it was called. And this girl, whose name I won't mention, you know, because probably better to be tactful about that. But my friend, you know, was faithfully there for that. Now, she also went upstate sometimes. I knew she had like a little place right in the Catskills. And one time she said, we ran into each other, and I used to joke that we didn't even need each other's phone numbers because I'd go out for a night on a town, and then there she'd be. And it was like, are you with somebody these days? No, me either. Oh, good. Let's go hang out. So we'd hang out for a couple of days. In fact, one time, this is really funny, she didn't know where I was living. I'd been in a couple of apartments since I'd seen her. She said, you know, I'm staying at somebody, they went away, and I'm like watering their plants and stuff, taking care of their place because it's not far from the nursing home. And it's easy, I can stay in the village that way because she was further uptown a little bit. She said, you know, I said, great. She said, I said, well, let's go to my house for a while. It was like 2 a.m, and she says, okay. And we start walking, and we walk, and then I say, well, here we are. And she looks at me very surprised. She says, oh my gosh, my friend, what are you on? I said, I'm on the 5th floor. She said, oh, my friend's on the 3rd floor. I'm staying in your building. I'm here tonight. I said, oh, isn't that too much? Isn't that funny? And, you know, explaining something about relationships in the 70s and this and that, you know, like sometimes people fell in love and they wanted to make a life together and they did that. Other times people didn't fall in love, but they really dug each other and they liked each other and they wanted to spend some time together. And that was okay too. So, you know, we both had that kind of thing. In fact, it was the kind of relationship you could ask each other, so did you meet anybody nice lately? Anybody could be special, you think? You know, because we knew we were special, but it wasn't that kind of special. It was a strange thing. You know, we just were like fun. So I went, she said, why don't you come up? One time we hung out and she says, you know, I'm staying up at this beautiful farm I've got. I'm doing a gig upstate. She said, I just came in for tonight, which of course she would come in that night and I go out that night, no phone call, nothing. There she is, and there I am. She said, well, and we spent the night. Then she said, why don't you come up for the weekend? Come on upstate. It's really nice up there, and there's blueberry patches all over the place, and I'm making blueberry pies and blueberry pancakes. There's blueberries everywhere. Why don't you, come up and have some fun? So I didn't have any gigs that weekend. Nothing was going on. I said, you know what? I'm going to join you. So I got up there, upstate, or, up the Catskills, and we're having our blueberry festival. And I said, by the way, have you met anybody and meet anybody interesting while you're up here? Because you pretty much shut away from the world. She said, well, there was one guy. I kind of was very interested in him. He seemed like a very interesting guy. I said, really? She said, he's a piano player. I said, oh yeah, I might know him. Who is he? She said, well, his name is Bill. And I said, wait a minute. Ponytail? Rides a motorcycle? She said, well, I don't know about that, but Ponytail, yeah. And he's playing over at Kutcher's. I said, I think that's the resort he's playing at. I said, I think that's my friend Bill Rubenstein. I wasn't sure which resort he was at, and I meant to call his wife and ask her where he was, but I think this is it. I said, you know what? Let's get dressed and go on over there. So we go over. It's about midnight, 11 o'clock, midnight, and we go to the Kutcher's. And as we get there, the band is playing a show every night for some kind of entertainer that would be there, usually, and the band is just getting off the stand, and there's Bill Rubenstein. And I go, Bill and Bob, and we're all so happy to see each other. And Bill says, come on, let's go have a cup of coffee. So, there's a coffee shop is still kind of open. It's like 10 o'clock, I think, like about that time. And Bill says, give it a few minutes. He said, everybody's going to leave. And the ballroom, they're going to clean up the ballroom. But in about an hour, the ballroom's going to be free. And I've got this beautiful Steinway Grand in there. And we can just play duets. So we love to play duets together. So I'm sitting there. We have our coffee and we talk about life and how it's been going and this and that. And then it's time we can go in there. So it's a big ballroom, a couple hundred people fit in there, long dinner tables. And that's where people eat. And, and it's a very fancy resort. And so Patty's there. It's just the three of us. I'm sorry, the girl and Bill and I. And she was she's wearing these short shorts and a blouse and this guy there. It's nighttime. We're in the country, so nobody got dressed up for this. I'm just dressed. So Bill sits down at the piano, and I get my horn out, and the girl lays down on the floor. She didn't sit at the table. She wanted to. She's kind of a hippie, by nature. She just lays down on the floor with her hands behind her head and starts listening. She's listening and we're playing. And Bill taught me the tune, A Time for Love, a Johnny Mandel tune. A time for climbing hills, for winking back at whippoorwills. Winking back, a time for summer skies, for winking back at fireflies and other words that harmonize with love. And it's a beautiful song. A time for holding hands together, a time for rainbow-colored weather, a time of make-believe that we've been dreaming of, etc. So Bill is teaching me that, and he's teaching me the lyrics. And I sort of knew at the tune, but I didn't really know it. And it's an interesting tune because it's reharmonized each time that melody comes back. Now that girl is sitting there listening to it, and we're playing and we play, and we say goodnight, and we go back to the house where I'm staying with her. And a few months later, a year and a half, maybe 2 years later. In the meantime, Bill died. Bill got cancer and died. And I went into Sweet Basil one night, and there was the girl. And she said, oh, I've been thinking about you. I wanted to tell you the story. What happened? I said, I guess, Bill died. She said, oh, I got to know Bill really well. I said, really? What happened? She said, well, a couple weeks after I saw him with you, I got invited to some friend's house for dinner. And they knew I was alone, and they thought that maybe I would I guess they invited Bill, maybe thinking to fix us up. I don't know why or what happened, but there he was. And we were eating dinner with my friends, and he didn't say a word. He just kept staring at me across the table. We weren't even sitting next to each other, but he would look at me and not say anything. And then finally, after dinner, he said to me, Bob Mover is a hell of an alto player, isn't he? And she said that broke the ice. And she said the next year and a half were the happiest year and a half of her life. She said he was a wonderful guy, wasn't he? He was an amazing human being. And what, like we were just lauding him. I said, yeah, I miss him every day. He was, he was great. He was the best. She said he was the most wonderful man. And I'm just privileged to have gotten to know him. And I said, well, she said, yeah. She said, we were really happy. It was the only time in my life I could say I was really happy for almost 2 years. And then we got the news that he had cancer. She said he'd been, and she said she'd also had some nursing training. She said, so I stayed with him right to the very end. And I tried to give him the best time he could have. And that was what happened. And I have to say, that night, we didn't go home together. It was sort of like, it wasn't right. Somehow, I don't know, for me, she was Bill's and, and I have never seen her again. But Bill was somebody who, he only recorded, he played with Chris Connor, the singer, and he played a little bit with Carmen McRae, and he played with everybody. He played with Zoot and Al, he played with a lot of people, but he didn't really get recorded that I know of. So once again, if anybody listening to this happens to have any musical memorabilia, tapes, or any kind of recording where Bill Rubenstein is playing, it would be great to hear that. And if you have any stories of your own about Bill, because Bill was one of those, besides being a great musician, he was one of those, what they used to call Greenwich Village characters that made New York what it was, that made the village. Tony Frisella was another guy who I didn't get to know, but I feel like I knew him because everybody had the legend of Tony Frisella, who was this wonderful trumpet player. And if you don't know Tony Frisella, Fruscella, he's another one. He played a short time with Stan Getz, but he never really did much of his own, except there's one record called Tony Frisella. I think it's on Atlantic, it might be, but he does a version of I'll Be Seeing You. That's one of the most beautiful trumpet, medium tempo ballads I've ever heard. I believe Bob DeRoe put lyrics to it. I know somebody did, and they actually, Red Mitchell. Red Mitchell put lyrics to that solo. And, Tony Frisella was played with Brew Moore, who was another, he moved to Europe, but these people sort of made that whole New York scene what it was, and you had then there was Kenny Dorham, and there were other people that got a little better known. But so those are a couple of Uncle Bob's bedtime stories. Um, and I would say that's that's
We
probably
actually have a question, if I may read it out loud.
wonderful.
All right, the question is from one moment, Belisario Sonic, and he or she says, "Greetings from Alabama. I love the stories. Any stories about Art Pepper or Ahmad Jamal?"
Well, unfortunately, Art was mostly on the West Coast, and I'm on the East Coast. I've been to Europe, maybe 70 or 80 times, and I've been to California 3 times. So I didn't really get to know Art. I heard him one night. Lee Konitz and I went to hear him together at the Vanguard. And I met him for about 5 minutes with Lee. And unfortunately, I don't have any personal memories of Art. I read his book, as you probably did too. And, I'm not going to even comment about that. I know Chet Baker told me a couple, I know some secondhand stories, but I don't really, I don't really know much about him except what Chet told me and what Art tells you about himself in that book. So unfortunately, I don't. And Ahmad Jamal, I never met, and I really enjoy his music. I can tell you one funny thing is one night in France, I was talking to this guy in Paris, and we were talking about piano players, and we said, "Oh yes, Red Garland." Oh yes, oui, Red Garland, Red Garland. I like very much Red Garland. And I said, "Yeah, and Sonny Clark goes, Sonny Clark, what a wonderful, who I also enjoy very much. I like Amajama, Amajama." And I'm thinking to myself, Amajama? Who is Amajama? It just somehow didn't compute. I said Amajama, and then it started to sound really funny. It sounded like some kind of incantation. We're saying back and forth to each other. I'm going, Amajama? He says, Amajama. Yeah, I mean, Amajama, Amajama, Amajama. And he's saying it slow then, Amajama. I said, Ahmad Jamal. I see. There's Amajama. But thank you very much for listening all the way from Alabama, and tell your friends. And I didn't get your name, but yeah, I wish I knew more about those cats, but I didn't. I don't know anything.
Belisario Sonic would also like to know if there are any chances that you might write a book about your experiences.
Oh, thank you, Sonic. I'm in the process of compiling my memoirs, and have a couple people actually helping me with that. I've been in this process for a couple of years now, probably about 3 years. And in fact, Jesse and I started it a few years ago, and actually got the whole, pretty much up to my 13th year of life. We got my childhood pretty well together, and that's just being edited. And but we got so busy with our other things that we have to give that a little bit of a break. So I do have 2 different people right now helping me, where I'm telling the stories and they're notating the stories, and I'm hoping to get it in the next year or two. But thank you for asking, and I hope we can get it together.
Michael Schuster would like to know any memories of Pete Yellen.
Yeah. Oh boy. Good ones. Um, Pete didn't like me. We liked each other later in life. We actually got along okay. But when I was 16, I think he misunderstood something about me. Um, I was about, yeah, was I? Yeah, I was 16. And I would go to these jam sessions, like we were talking about the Cafe London and Woody's and some of these places. And, you know, people always pay attention to some kid. I think it was partly that. But sometimes people would, I'd get more applause than he would or something. And Pete was about 10 years older than me, I think. And he, I was very respectful for him. In fact, I asked him if I could take a lesson with him because he was definitely, I thought he was a really nice alto player. And he was kind of tough. He had this, but I just figured that's how New York people are. I was kind of new in New York, and he had this hard edge to him. Yeah, kind of snarling. But I said, well, we can have a lesson at this friend of mine's house. Now, my first New York year in New York was a little unusual. I went to Brandeis High, which was on 84th, 85th, and between Amsterdam, Columbus Avenues. At that time, that was not considered the Upper West Side as a fashionable neighborhood. That was, people called it Johannesburg, because it was a little below Harlem, and it was a rough neighborhood. And it was 85% black and Puerto Rican and 15% white. And but I had some friends because I had gone to Phil Woods' jazz camp, Ramblerny, and these friends were going to the Dalton School. The Dalton School lately is more famous as the place where Jeffrey Epstein taught. But it gives you the idea. I mean, the Dalton School, like you'd sit there and you'd see Lauren Bacall or Jason Robards in front of the school waiting for Leslie Bogart, who was her daughter with Humphrey Bogart. David Susskind, who was a big television personality, was there to pick up his kids. Betty Friedan, her son John Friedan went there, the women's lib person, Betty Friedan. Anyway, there was that kind of thing. And one of the kids that went there was a guy named John Ruttenberg. And his father was basically STP Oil. And they lived on Beekman Place. And for instance, they had original Matisse murals. They had the art in their house would have been Goya etchings, original of those. Their personal chef to the family had been Chiang Kai-shek's personal chef. Chiang Kai-shek was the president of China before the communists took over, before Mao took over. So this was John's house, and he liked jazz, and we got along, and we were friends. He was an unusual kid, you know. I mean, he was extremely entitled, and you know, but not a bad person. He was okay. I like John. I don't know what happened to him, but he's around. And hi, John, if you're watching. Anyway, Pete came over to John's to give me a lesson. Now, maybe he thought that I lived in that house, or that I was one of those people that went to that school, because somehow he treated me like I was one of them, where I was much closer economically to being one on Pete's side of the economic wagon there, you know. But anyway, whatever it was, John had this beautiful Steinway, so you know we were having our lesson, and Pete really came down on me. He said, "You know, you think you're good, but you stink." He said, "You got nothing happening." He said, "There's a kid named Steve Grossman, and he's your age, and he can play. He sounds just like Cannonball. You know, you don't got shit." And I mean, he just insulted me for an hour, and I paid him. And then I cried. And I still continued to play at sessions with him, continued to know him. And, you know, even when I got a little older, he came to my gig at Sweet Basil one night and he said, "You know, you're out of tune." And I probably was, though. He's probably right. He's a good musician. And, but, if you ignore somebody enough, you get along with him. Um, there were other occasions that when I showed him that it really didn't bother me, he could insult me. And plus, by the way, I did get better. That was the other thing. I mean, I think he might have been right. And maybe I needed somebody to put me in my place. I mean, maybe, if anything, Pete was honest. What I was doing wasn't getting to him. And Steve was a hell of a player and probably was advanced to me. I heard Steve a little after that. And, he sure played well. I think he was ahead of me. So, he wasn't wrong. But he said, you're not supposed to play the alto like that. He said, because I had a little Lee Konitz influence. I'd been getting into that. He said, Cannonball's the way to play the alto. Don't play that faggot Lee Konitz shit. And I thought he was a very unpleasant guy at that point. But later on, when he became a father, when he had his daughter Allegra, a little transformation seemed to take place in Pete. I said, I was interested, and I asked him, has the daughter been born yet? Has the child been? He said, oh yeah, man, she's beautiful. And then all of a sudden, once we talked about his kid, he was really nice to me after that. I think the fact that I was interested in his life a little bit, and so I'm not going to judge him. I don't tell. It's easy to just dismiss a person as being a jerk and this kind of thing. I don't think Pete was a jerk, but I think, that I had this unpleasant experience with him. So I've talked too much about that, but I was sorry when he died. He died too young, and he was Joe Henderson, and he were like brothers. Joe loved Pete. I know that, and anyway, and he became successful. He was, I think, it was the Long Island University. He became, and some good players came out of that. A guy named Jimmy Prav, excellent guitarist, and anyway, may he rest in peace. He's a good cat. So that's a story I didn't intend to tell. So I guess that would be, if there's anybody else with a question, I thank you for your questions, Michael, and both of you. And once again, I'd like to thank all of you who have been watching this and for being part of our channel. And I kind of urge you to subscribe because it's free and it helps us more than you know. I also noticed that, Jesse and I noticed that 37.5% watch this show, but have not subscribed. So, like I said, it helps if you do subscribe. Visit @Bob Mover Jazzability, and we have coming up. I'm very happy to announce that next week we have on Thursday night the great Gary Bartz. That will be the 1st of February. And, Gary has had a very interesting life and illustrious career. And we've got a lot of friends that we knew in common. And also, it's a nice night for the alto or saxophone because February 2nd will be the centennial of the birth of Sonny Stitt. So it's nice that we get together with Gary, and I believe Gary has probably some Sonny Stitt experiences to recount. And I'd like to thank Jesse Kaiser, our producer, for having been, for making all this happen. And I would say until next week with Gary, we'll see you next time. and try to subscribe because it really will help us out. Please. Thank you.